But yeah, I'm Tash, dietitian at Connect Healthcare and nutrition strategies this morning. So I think we've got a bit of basketball, we've got a couple of runners. Do we have team sports as well? Anyone cyclists? Yeah, cool. I thought we'd have a sort of a bunch of different sort of sports and hobbies and all of that sort of stuff. So I think it'll all be, quite relevant, some of the strategies for everyone. So I guess we're just sort of going through the basics today. Just wanted to say that, this is generalised advice for, a variety of people, but, it doesn't take into account individualised strategies. So if, say, you've got a specific goal or strategy that you're wanting to work on, or a specific, health condition, it's always good to talk to your GP or a dietitian about any changes or strategies that you're wanting to incorporate. I'm assuming a little bit of general baseline knowledge about nutrition, but if if something isn't clear enough for you, please feel free to ask me if I can explain something in a bit more detail. And again, keeping in mind that I want to include everyone in the types of sport that they're doing, so I might use race or game or match or event day to include all of you. So that will sort of be what I'll be using throughout. So I guess, how is everyone feeling about their base knowledge of, I guess, the energy that we use throughout sport and activity, and how that sort of relates to different nutrients a little bit? Yeah. I guess, as an overview, we've got, our three main macronutrients. So we've got carbohydrates, which are found in things like, your breads, pastas, fruits and things like that. And they are, a primary source of fuel and energy for our bodies. And then we've got protein, which is really important for our muscle health, but also our immune systems and making hormones and all of that sort of stuff. And they're, lean meats, eggs, fish, nuts and seeds and beans and stuff like that. And then we've also got fats that are important for keeping fat on our body, keep us warm, and also for making certain hormones, enzymes and all of that sort of stuff. So those are our general macronutrients that make up the foods that we eat. And then I guess we throw in our vitamins and minerals that are a part of that. But there are three main things that provide our bodies with energy to use to move around every day, and especially to help us fuel our sport. I guess today we'll be looking at what you should be doing before an event, during an event, and what you can be doing to facilitate your recovery. And then I'll touch briefly on some tips around injury and injury recovery. Coming back to carbs, pre-event we want to be focusing on fueling ourselves up with some carbohydrates. They are our body's primary source of fuel. We store carbohydrates as sugar in our muscles, so glycogen. Has everyone heard of glycogen? Cool, all right, that's good. The carbs that we eat are digested into sugars and either used in the bloodstream for energy or stored in our muscles. So I guess eating carbs before an event helps make sure that we're storing enough to be able to use when we're doing an exercise or activity. They are also important for helping us concentrate and focus, so that can be relevant for sports like, even golf and archery. We know that having a good carb intake can help us, focus in that way, and also delay fatigue. They're also important with our immune system, especially when we're active, so it's an interesting point as well. Has anyone had an interest or read anything about athletes training on more low carb, high fat diets, or an interest area? No, that's all right. I sort of, didn't know who was around. I know Ryan, our chiropractor, is pretty interested in sort of more low carb, high fat eating patterns. And I guess just as a preface, that there are studies that athletes can train their bodies to work well and use fat more so as carbs when they're performing. But generally on a race day, people that are fueled with carbs are going to be able to outperform them. So for example, using those quick bursts of energy, sprints, taking over people, all of those sorts of stuff. If you've got carbs in your system, you're going to be doing a better job than those.
Ask, when you say pre-event,
yeah.
do you mean the night before, 2 days before, like the morning of?
Yep. So we will get into that, but this is sort of, I guess, the couple of days leading up and the day of we'll cover. So not so much weeks, but, especially for like team sports and that, the day before you might be utilising some of these strategies and the day of. And then going more on the type of carbohydrates, we've got quick digesting ones that help us absorb and use that sugar quite quickly. So that's things like white bread, white rice, jelly beans, cordial, those more refined carbohydrates. And we've also got slow digesting carbs, which generally are accompanied with fibre. So they take it's longer to digest in the body, slower release of carbohydrates into your system. And that's like your whole grains, porridge, fruits, things like that. So they both play an important role in general, healthy eating patterns, but both of them do play a role in planning your nutrition around your sports. In terms of, the days leading up to an event, doesn't really matter which one you want to choose. It's your preference, what you feel good on. But we will get more into sort of looking at those quicker digesting carbs on race day. So the day before an event or a match, we'd be recommending you to just a very light training. I know before marathon, some people might drop back and do, a 3K run or a walk just to get their bodies moving, but without, risk of injury the day before, but also making sure you're not using up any of the stores that you're working to build up. And you're going to be wanting to focus on your carbohydrate intake. So these guidelines are for pretty serious athletes, and I guess our textbook would be aiming to get 7 to 10 grams of carbohydrates per your kilogram body weight for the day or the days before. But we can see, again, not sure what your baseline knowledge of carbohydrates and how much they have in them and how much we eat every day, and it is very varied, but for me that looks like a lot, and in real life we know that some athletes really can struggle to get in that amount of recommendations of carbohydrates every day, and that's okay. So we've got to just do what we can do and test out things. So I guess throughout this I'll try to save time by not saying it repeatedly, but in terms of sports nutrition and race days, you're always going to be trying different things more on a practice or a training rather than a race day, because you don't want to throw in anything new that throws off your performance. So it's all about giving it a go and seeing what works for you. So generally, for someone that generally includes carbs in their diet and is playing, a game of footy or basketball or netball or that, it might be just the day before having a chill out day and trying to include 1 or 2 extra bits of carbs in your diet, whether it's a larger serve of pasta at dinner or, having a glass of juice when you might not usually have juice at breakfast, just to increase your carbohydrates a little bit to be stored for the next day. But when we're looking at, marathons, endurance events, sports carnivals, you might be looking at sitting down and having a think about where you're going to fit your nutrition in and where and how you might fit your carbs in the days leading up to the event. And do I need to carb load? So I think carb load is, quite a sort of bit of a lingo, and we can sort of say, oh, I've got it on, I've got a carb load and all of that sort of stuff. But I guess clinically it is quite a protocol. So it's, it's sort of looking at 3 days before an event. What are you doing? You're going to be detraining and, having 3 very high carb days and, planning your hydration around all of that. And it is quite a protocol. So I guess, again, you'd be looking at that if you're doing more endurance events rather than, just, something for an hour or 2 hours. But, it is something that you can consider and talk with, your sports dietitian about, or your coach, and see if they think it would be helpful for you and start planning around that. So what are we going to be doing on the day of? You're going to be wanting to have a meal or a snack before, just to make sure that you've got that energy running through your system. And again, the textbook recommendations are to have about 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of carbs. And that would be, you'd be aiming not to have it right before your race, because you don't want to get a tummy upset or feel like you're too full and heavy, and that affects your performance. So say you've got an event at 1 o'clock, you might be looking at having a more solid breakfast a few hours before and heading for that larger amount of carbohydrates. Or it might be, a mid-morning, earlier morning event where you just want to get in, a little bit of carbohydrates to just give you a bit of a boost to start off with. And again, this can be flexible in terms of the type of event that you're doing. So you might be doing a half marathon, so you might have the smaller snack before and then plan some nutrition to just give you that boost during the event, which we can go through again as well. So I guess, what that might look like we'll go through, but the main takeaway is find something that works for you and stick to it. So I think what's really nice about, your day of the event, your race day, is that you can get a routine going and it sets you up and it gets you in that mindset to feel really ready and on board for what you're doing, and that can become part of your routine. It might be toast and juice in the morning and then maybe half of a sandwich before your event, and that sets you up and you're feeling good to go. And again, where we talked about those different types of digestible carbohydrates, you're going to be looking to use something that's going to be absorbed really quickly or broken down by the body quickly. So that's going to be looking like, white toast and jam or honey or something like that, rather than, your porridge with full cream milk and all of that sort of stuff, because you're going to be able to use that quickly and it's not going to sit in your tummy for too long, and we want to avoid feeling too heavy or full, and that's the same for fat and protein. Slows down our digestion, and what we want is to be able to quickly digest and move on and start focusing on our race or our game. So that's all well and good to know that, but what might it actually look like? So I guess for around a 65, 70 kilo athlete, this is what we would be recommending how a day might look before your game or your race. And it might look like, oh yeah, that looks good, I can do that. Or some people might think, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through all of that food? So for example, this looks like, a cup and a half of cereal with low fat milk, a couple of slices of toast with honey, wash it down with the juice, morning tea. Lunch would be 2 sandwiches with a bit of protein. Afternoon tea, you probably wash that down with a juice as well. Afternoon tea might be some sugary cereal washed down with a cordial, and then dinner you're going to be getting in, a couple of cups of pasta and maybe a yogurt as well to just try and get some of those carbohydrates in. Again, that's all fitting in with meeting those higher guidelines of 7 to 10 grams of carbs. But I guess looking at, fitting in some juice or cordial as on top of your general intake might be enough to just help top you up and get a few more carbohydrates in, rather than following a specific protocol. But say you're running a half or a full marathon or doing, a really long cycle, you might be looking to get serious and try and include a little bit more on the day before. What I think is interesting about this slide, and something good to consider, is that apart from maybe the Milo, and you're thinking, oh, she's a dietitian, isn't Milo cereal really unhealthy? But I guess, the rest of it looks pretty healthy. We've got fruits and vegetables, it looks like a grainy bread, nice healthy muesli. But I guess another strategy that can be is that in the couple of days before, you might be chucking healthy food out the window and thinking more about how can I get my carbohydrates in without making myself feel like I'm eating heaps and heaps and heaps. And again, this is more for endurance events, but something like a Milo cereal and juice is going to get you in more carbohydrates in a smaller volume compared to, 2 sandwiches and some cereal. It's about getting savvy about that and having a look and reading labels, and it's up to you how healthy or unhealthy you want to go, but it can be a good strategy for those people that might really need to be considering that they need to, build their intake up of carbs to help their performance. And what might some snacks look like before race day? So that would be, 2 cups of pasta maybe, if it's more of an afternoon event and you're a savoury person, or it might be toast, honey and banana. And if you're someone who does sort of get nervous before an event, maybe doesn't have much of an appetite. It could be, you know, going to the cafe and getting a large muffin and a juice or a coffee or something like that. And I guess, again, that conversation about, you know, being tactical and trying to get things in a smaller volume. A muffin might be easier for you to get in over the day rather than, you know, having a larger plate of food. So we'll go on to during an event. So this is, I've sort of split this down to different categories of sport. So if we're doing a gym class, a smaller training, a quicker run or ride, we're not going to have to worry about getting strategic about our nutrition. Just, you know, plan it around, you know, your meals and fit it in your day and continue on like nothing happened. But when we're getting into events, you know, 60 to 80 minutes like a sports match or things, you know, over 90, where we're going to be needing extended, you know, fuel and energy, we're going to be thinking about what we can get in to just keep our carbs up to be able to continue our performance. So the general guidelines are 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour, but to make that relevant to you, it might be, you know, washing down some Gatorade in structured sports breaks, or when you're on a ride, having that in your sort of stocks, and, you know, some lollies at half time, or some, you know, orange slices, fruit, those sorts of things. But we also have, you know, access to sports gels and, you know, those sorts of products if you're more of a runner or a cyclist, and that can be helpful. And then once we're getting into really ultra endurance events, we're going to be wanting to really get strategic about how many carbohydrates we're fitting in per hour. But I don't know how much that applies to us, so we don't have to get into too much detail. I might get excited and talk a bit too much. One thing I think a few people might find interesting is this mouth rinse. So it's an interesting technique that's been shown in various studies, especially in runners and cyclists, but we do see a lot of different sports players using it, is, you know, having Gatorade, rinsing it around in your mouth for 5 minutes and spitting it out. You've probably seen very many AFL players do it on the telly. But it's actually been shown that whilst, you know, keeping up those sort of carbohydrates over your game can help with sustaining performance, doing that mouth rinse with a sugar present in whatever you're rinsing your mouth with actually lights up certain areas of your brain, so it recognises that sweet taste and makes you think, yeah, I can do a little bit more, I can get through this. So for times where you might be needing to, you know, do a quick burst of sprinting, you might be, you know, 3/4 at time at netball or basketball, or half, they're halves, but you know, and you're feeling a bit tired, you've had a little bit at half time, but you might just feel that's a helpful strategy to just, you know, get that quick burst going. It could be something interesting to try and see how you go. All right, and then I guess this is getting for, you know, more endurance events, but the combination, you know, I've talked about sports drinks a little bit, and for shorter events, you know, it's nothing that we really need to focus on, but when we're looking at needing to sustain our hydration, the combination of a water, sugar, and sodium is actually the perfect way that we can hydrate ourselves. So the sodium helps us absorb that water and use it in our volume rather than being produced into urine. And also it helps us absorb that glucose and carbohydrate. And when it's in the right balance, such as when it's made in sports drinks, it actually helps the stomach volume and leads to less, you know, you can picture running around and you've got water in your tummy, not feeling, doesn't make you feel that great, but sports drinks do, you know, have a unique makeup in that they are made to be, you know, well absorbed and well used by the body. So what are we going to be looking at after an event? Again, I'll stop talking about carbohydrates soon, but again, you know, we've just worked pretty hard and we're going to be wanting to make sure that we top up those sugars into our muscles to restore our muscle glycogen stores. And this optimises our recovery and how we're going to be feeling after that. And uniquely, you know, in the first couple of hours post-exercise or match, that's actually going to where the body's most sensitive to glucose uptake. So our insulin sensitivity is up, so we're ready to absorb them. There's also a few other enzymes related to that upregulate how we're going to store and use that fuel. Thanks for putting that on, Chloe. I didn't know where the switch was. And yeah, again, I'm not going to be talking about grams per kilogram or anything, but just generally try and get something in the first couple of hours. And again, some barriers that people will face is that they've just worked really hard, they're exhausted, and how am I going to go home and cook a meal? Or, your appetite is probably going to be less than maybe you'd want it to be to try and get strategic around your post-recovery nutrition. But just, so again, sports drinks or flavoured milk or lollies or, something light but that's just going to get some carbs in can be utilised in that time. So I'm going to stop talking about carbohydrates, but we're going to talk about muscle and protein. So protein, is important for the gains. So if we're doing, training or, again, I've talked about muscle glycogen, but every time we're going to be using our muscles and every time we're going to be, if it's a resistance training or moving around on a field or cycling, we're going to be working those muscles. And what happens is they actually get a small tears throughout them when they're used. And the way that then responds to getting stronger or recovering is that muscle is rebuilt. And protein is really, really important to complement that process. So I've got here that it's more of your refueling priority than pre-fueling. And again, if we can combine carbohydrates and protein together after exercise, that's going to optimize your recovery process. And if you're someone who thinks, I just don't want to eat too many carbs after I've done, or the types of foods don't appeal to you, if you're not going to be getting in quite as much, having that carbohydrate with protein can actually help you absorb the carbohydrates in the lower amount in the similar capacities if you're packing in as many carbs as you can after. So they really do complement each other after exercise. From more of a just training perspective and wanting to be active, you might be looking to gain muscle mass or just make sure that the training that you're doing is well complemented. The best way to do that is making sure that you consume protein over the day. A lot of us find that maybe we might have toast in the morning, something light for lunch, and then we sit down to a barbecue dinner or roast, and that's where we're going to be getting in our main source of protein through the meat. But the best way, because our bodies are always recovering and building that muscle, is to make sure that we're fueling it throughout the day. So I've got some examples, and if you're interested in having this information, I can send it through. Might look like fitting in, some of these foods 3 to 4 times a day, and these serving sizes do give us about 20 grams of protein, which is a really sweet spot for how much we absorb and use for our muscle recovery. So if we include it sort of over the day, whereas if we sit down to a big steak, we might be getting up to 40, 50 grams of protein, and our body's probably not going to be using it all as much in that one hit as well as if it was getting it in over the day. These are some examples. Soybeans and lentils are, really high quality vegetarian sources of proteins, but if you are preferring to follow more of a vegetarian diet, it's just about getting in a wide variety of different foods. So, a variety of beans, whole grains, nuts, seeds, tofu and things like that can be helpful. And some examples of that might be trying to have eggs or dairy at breakfast, sneaking in some tuna or deli meat into your sandwich if it's usually salad, and, dinner, and some examples of snacks there. So I think we've pretty much gone through it all, but this is a really popular question that I get. If you're telling me to get protein in, do I need a protein shake? And the answer is no, you don't. You can definitely get it in through, your food, but some people do find it really helpful, especially if we're thinking about appetites or post-workout, if we're really thinking can't sit down to a meal, it can be really helpful to get in enough protein, especially if you're not a big meat eater and things like that. If we're looking at elite levels, we're going to be needing to be careful about what sort of protein product we are using, because if you're getting tested or you have friends that are playing at an elite level, making sure that it is something that's ASADA approved. It doesn't have any contamination with other sort of banned substances. But there's lots of supplements that are made in these sort of companies' warehouses, and it can be at risk. So there are plenty of options out there. And just to quickly finish off with some tips about injury, but first of all, how does that all sound? Is that a bit overwhelming? Did I make sense? Has it been okay so far? So we've injured ourselves, oh no, but just some tips about nutrition that often can sort of fly under the radar, but it can play an important role. A lot of athletes might forcibly reduce how much they're eating in an effort, if they're not mobilising as much, if they're having to rest, don't want to put on too much weight, so they try and pull back how much they're eating. But nutrition, I guess, especially for some particular injuries, our body's actually going to need fuel to target that healing process. But also protein comes in again. So if we're not moving around as much, our muscle mass is going to be at risk of sort of declining. So making sure that you're eating protein over the day, following those similar strategies, is going to be a really good tip. And then something that I'm sort of looking into at the moment is collagen. So for soft tissue injuries, tendonitis, there's some really interesting research coming out that supplementing collagen will speed up the recovery process and get you back on the field or the bike sooner rather than later. So it is just a bit of a novel area at the moment, but it does have some really good data around it, so it could be something to try, and look out for some things coming to connect soon. But generally it's looking at around 15 grams of collagen or gelatin in supplement form every day, because we don't get it in huge amounts through our food naturally. And if we're combining that with recovery exercise, we've seen Ben or Tom or Chloe for some rehab, having that supplement 30-40 minutes before you start doing some of those rehab exercises is going to target that tissue recovery and rebuilding, because I guess collagen is a primary makeup of those soft tissues. So and I guess there's been no adverse effects reported from doing it. So even if you don't find that maybe you're recovering as well as maybe you're expecting, it's not going to be doing any harm. So it is something interesting to sort of look at. But I've been talking for too long, so I think we'll leave it there. Does anyone have any questions or anything that maybe I need to go over in a bit more detail? Or
you mentioned you could send the information out to
yeah, for sure. Yeah, some of those sort of tips of foods and different things, I could definitely distribute that for sure. Cool. Yeah.
We've got a really odd month coming up. We've got 6 games for some reason. We've got to play some Thursday night games. So we've got Thursday night, Friday, and Saturday.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking in terms of carb loading. Is that, you sort of mentioned it's like in the couple of days beforehand, is that going to be extended out to account for that lack of sort of rest. Between two?
Yeah, I guess it definitely is unique, and I guess it'd be incorporating or being mindful of some of those strategies. So you might do a higher carb day on the Wednesday or Thursday breakfast and lunch to just boost you up, ready for that, and then you might focus on another higher carb day on the Friday.
So hard. We did it a little bit last year, and it was really challenging because it's Thursday night.
Yeah, and then that minimal. Yeah, so what I'd be recommending there is making sure that you're getting in as much carbohydrate, well, not as much, so you don't have to go and eat heaps, but really being strategic and trying to get a good amount in after your Thursday night game, and then seeing how you feel on the Friday, having a bit extra on the Friday, and see how that affects how you're feeling on the Saturday. Yeah, that's all right. Good luck. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, I'm happy to send some stuff through, and I think Josh is thinking that it'll go on YouTube. So if you ever want to go back and read over a couple of things, that'll be available as well. So thank you for coming along. I hope it was useful, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, Annie.